Depending on how much notice you have of advance notice and warning of what's going to happen, you may already be moving gold bars, money, jewelry, valuables of various types out of the country well in advance. You would also look at your emergency fund, which is basically your escape fund. And that escape fund would be parked in a foreign country or a Swiss bank or somewhere where you can potentially get your hands on it, that if you leave stuff behind. Inevitably, you can't take everything. You can't take the kitchen sink. You've got to take what is absolutely necessary. Me, as the person managing that extraction, I would want to make sure that you had basically all that you could carry. If you can't carry it, you don't take it. So moving from the airport from the palace to the airport, highly likely, depending on what the ground intelligence dictated, whether there were roadblocks, rebels had entered the city, they were in a situation where they'd be compromised. It's always better to go by airframe to move, obviously, from one location to another. So whether it be going to a temporary transit point, anything that goes by road becomes complicated. Having been to Damascus myself, I know how congested the roads are. And if there's chaos, you're going to have everybody else trying to get out of the city. So you'd move him by airframe. So it's highly likely he probably took a heli from the palace to the airport, which would have been the private section of the airport. Plane probably has already been on the pan, has already been there on the apron, waiting for the last month, fueled, ready to go. Again, I've been on tasks where me and a team have stood by on the side of an airstrip with a private jet waiting to go. And it was hurry up and wait. And literally we stayed there for a good long period of time before we actually took off. So he would have gone with his presidential bodyguard. His family would have that as well. They'd probably have surplus security, which the Russians would have already documented, tagged, vetted, ensured that they knew who they were. They're not going to introduce a threat. As to the protection of the presidential palace or his personal belongings or those of his wife and his family, they would be at the mercy of the rebels. There is a certain degree of a sacrificial gesture that you have to make, that if he'd taken and stripped every bit of wealth out of those palaces and taken them with him, that would not appease the rebels necessarily. So there may be a considerable amount of gold bars or cash that was left there, which again can work very well, sometimes, again, depending on who the force is or the rebels are, where they can end up fighting with each other because they get greedy and they get their hands on the stuff. I know certainly in Iraq, with Uday and Husse's palaces and Saddam's Babylon palace, a lot of people may have walked off with a few souvenirs and they would be running disinformation. So the subterfuge element is very, very key. You want to do that. You want to put them off your scent. You want to send them scattered in a multitude of different directions. So yeah, you will do whatever you can to confuse the enemy, confuse their intelligence networks, to dispute any reported sightings in various different forms. And again, it's not simply a case of going, hey, I've seen James in that location. This would be sophisticated, pre-planned infosec operations. Well, you look at the president of the United States when he travels on Marine One, which is his helicopter. He never flies in a singular helicopter. He always flies in 3 helicopters. So there is one, which nobody knows is the one which actually carries the president. And there are 2 others, which not only provide tactical support, but if someone with an RPG or a Stinger or something wants to take it out of the sky, they're going to have a 1 in 3 chances of potentially hitting the president. So yeah, it's one of those things where they would run various different vehicles. They could have a presidential car, his favorite limo, whatever it might be, driving off into the opposite direction, Damascus, with someone sat in the back that looks like his wife, looks like him, looks like a family member. And again, running that in tandem with intelligence feeds and disinformation can work very well at distracting the enemy and sending them off on a wild goose chase. So again, it's about running psychological operations, implementation operations, tactical operations on various different levels. In terms of an extraction, Mr. President Assad would have no doubt had a emergency extraction plan already in play. This would have been prepared for, it would have been planned for many, many years. And there are 3 fundamentals that you look at with any kind of extraction plan. You're looking at by air, by land, or by sea, depending on what you have available to you. Now, in terms of obviously those types of plans, you need to ready them accordingly, that you have time thresholds between obviously not only moving your principal, in this instance, President Assad, from wherever it is that he is, but have all those component parts in place to ensure that there's a secure escort to getting them to that boat, that plane, or it's an even larger escort, obviously, if you're going to be traversing the land and getting across a foreign border. Now, the first thing that you always look at is a first staging point. So the first staging point is where you are going to regroup. So how you get the family members there. It could be the pets, not only the principal themselves, could be some of their valuables. And how are you going to pick up those things very quickly? Now, in my world, when we're called to rally or to respond to an emergency, all of us will generally have what we call a go bag. And a go bag will contain all the basic elements that we need. Now, if the extraction is uncertain in terms of where you will go, although you should have already planned that, maybe even discussed it with a nation state that's neighboring, that you can obviously take safe refuge there if need be. You probably also need to look at certain aspects like wealth, things like cash. And the team obviously would need to look at ensuring that they can get through various different checkpoints or certain areas where problems may occur. Now, those problems may not be necessarily authorities. These could be individuals who are working for the opposite side, so working for the enemy. So bribing, incentivizing them, call it what you like, might be an option that you need to consider, that if you have a small sortie or a small patrol group that's working for the other side, you come into contact with, or they're going to be in your path. Depends on whether you actually use force to potentially prevail, or whether you may say, right, here you go, guys, here's $50,000. Keep your mouth shut. You never saw us. So there are lots of different ways that you can come at it. It really depends on the intel that you have. Trying to create a safe corridor for your principal to escape, perhaps through an opposing force or a coup d'etat, or if it's the military that have taken over, or rebel force for that matter, will depend on the existing relationship. It will also depend on the temperature of acrimony that is felt towards that leader. Now, if you look at something like Gaddafi, Gaddafi was a plan that was not well planned. It was not considered. And quite often when these plans fall apart, it will be the arrogance of the principal or the individual that you're trying to extract, not allowing or affording for that planning to take place. However, in Assad's case, he had a well-executed, well-planned extraction plan. And again, he would be using members of special forces, Syrian special forces, to probably help him implement that plan. He may have also acquired, as is often the way, foreign former members of special forces. Could be from the US, could be from the UK, could be from anywhere, who will have extensive experience in these fields. So what you may have initially, even if you have the agreement by the Swiss authorities, for example, to relocate to Switzerland, or it could be to London, or it could be to Moscow, or it could be to wherever, you will have an initial staging point. So once you've moved out of the country, out of the most immediate danger, and going to a Russian airbase, probably as good as any, because you're going to have obviously the military support there to protect you, in addition to your own security team. From there, you may or may not have made those preparations. For someone like Assad, he will have made those preparations. Agreements will have already been set in place with fellow nations that will afford him. He will have already been through that process of trying the UK, trying the United States, trying Italy, trying Spain, trying India, trying the Chinese. He would have gone through that to see who is the most viable, and then honing it down in terms of agreement for that country to say, yes, when this is invoked, when your extraction is invoked, you come and see us. But you stop temporarily, you regroup, you reassess, you look at what your options are potentially moving from there. Because the option may be, yes, you get in a TriStar, or you get in a 747, which might potentially then move you from that Russian base over to whichever country you're going to. You want to minimize the number of fuel stops that you're going to have to do, so it should be somewhere immediate. Otherwise, you may move to one other location. Again, hold fast there for a period of time. Could be days, could be weeks, could be months. And then you move on to your ultimate destination. So there could be a number of legs in the hop through to your ultimate sanctuary.